President Trump has spent much of his second term consolidating power inside the executive branch, from shuttering and weakening federal agencies to enacting sweeping tariffs and conducting military operations. But should Republicans be concerned with the precedent Trump is creating? Here to discuss, The Hill's White House reporter Brett Samuels. Hey, Brett, so President Trump continues to test the powers of the executive branch. Are Republicans, especially those in Congress, comfortable with this consolidation of power?
Yeah, Drew, the general answer seems to be yes, that most Republicans are comfortable with this, or at least they're going along with it. They're not really putting up any kind of a fight to stop it. Certainly, you have some Republicans here and there. Rand Paul, for example, has expressed concerns about presidential war powers and how President Trump is kind of using that. And you have a few criticisms here and there, but for the most part, we've seen Congress really just kind of go along with President Trump's use of executive power to just push through his agenda. We've seen Speaker Mike Johnson, for example, be one of the most, outspoken or central defenders of that. Obviously, he's been put on the spot a lot about these things. But you look at even traditional issues, like, for example, President Trump's use of executive power to impose tariffs. That's something that some Republicans traditionally might have said that's up to Congress. That's sort of a taxation issue that falls under Congress's purview. But so far under this Congress, Republicans seem happy to just kind of let President Trump take the wheel and kind of drive his own policy without much interference from lawmakers on Capitol Hill.
Trump's style seems to be act now and let the courts figure it out later. Is the president's theory that eventually he will win these cases once they reach the Supreme Court?
That does seem to be sort of the prevailing theory for a lot of these things. This idea that, let lawsuits come, and if courts block it, the Trump administration will just appeal these things right up to the Supreme Court. Obviously, there is that 6-3 conservative majority in the Supreme Court. We've seen a number of court wins already for this administration, a couple of setbacks, but that is something that the Trump administration, we've seen time and again this play out, where particularly on immigration, with tariffs, where the Trump administration is happy to just appeal these lawsuits and ask for sort of an expedited review from the Supreme Court, and hopefully get an approval from the Supreme Court that they can just carry forward. So I think the Trump administration, they're obviously frustrated with the number of lawsuits that have targeted a lot of their policies, but they have certainly been very aggressive in their decisions to appeal a lot of these right at the Supreme Court and let the Supreme Court decide sort of what the administration can proceed with and what it can't.
When it comes to the president's willingness to use executive power, is there a difference between Trump's first term and this one?
Definitely, yeah. I think, on a couple levels, there's the pace. We've seen, the president obviously in his first term used executive power, and this has been a trend where, presidents have over the years increasingly been using executive action to essentially bypass gridlock in Congress and sort of try and get their agenda done. We're seeing President Trump in his second term really kind of take that to another level. We've seen hundreds really of executive actions signed during the first year that Trump has been back in office. These have ranged from, sort of standard things that we see every president do, where they undo actions by the previous president, or appoint people to boards or whatever it may be. But we've also seen this president try and use executive action to, for example, end birthright citizenship, to impose tariffs, to bar transgender athletes from participating in women's sports. We've seen this president, really both use executive action to deliver on campaign promises in ways that we hadn't seen before, but also just the sheer pace and volume of executive actions has been really different from what we saw during Trump's first term.
Is there concern among Trump and his supporters that this reliance on executive orders to enact his agenda would be easily overturned if a Democrat enters the White House?
Yeah, that's sort of the big case, I think, against using executive power to this degree, is that it's not codified by any kind of law in Congress. The next president could theoretically just come in and sign orders to undo a lot of what is being done right now. We saw President Trump obviously do that with what the Biden administration did. He came in and within a few days sort of unwound some things that the Biden administration did. He pulled the U.S. back out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He's undone environmental regulations and reversed various other actions taken by the Biden administration. So that is sort of the case against using executive power, is that it's not as permanent. It's much easier to undo. But certainly we've seen all this happen in year one under Trump. I think it is a fair question to say Trump has 3 more years in office left. 3 years from now, 4 years from now, what will things look like? The Democrats, how much would a Democratic president be able to actually undo, and how much would actually be sort of just ingrained in government and in society by that point?
There has been a small group of Republicans who have publicly voiced concerns about the White House brushing aside Congress. Do you think that pushback could grow as we get closer to midterm elections?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. There have been a handful of Republicans, particularly around some of these issues. For example, the White House has used executive power to, undo congressionally approved spending. We saw a rescissions package that, was approved by Congress, but then we saw these pocket rescissions signed off on by Trump to sort of unilaterally cut congressionally approved spending. Some Republicans, like Susan Collins, for example, of Maine, pushed back on that. Susan Collins, somebody who's up for re-election in 2026. So I think, you may see, particularly for folks who are in competitive re-election fights next November, you may see them sort of increasingly distance themselves from the White House on some of these things, or criticize the White House to try and draw that contrast, that difference during the midterm elections, when traditionally the president and his party that's in power, they tend to face an uphill battle. So I do think you may see an increasing number of Republicans point to executive actions here and there that they sort of take issue with, as a way to try and show voters that they're willing to draw a differentiation with the White House.
Looking into next year, do you foresee the president further testing the limits of executive power in 2026?
Yeah, I think it's fair to expect that that's where this is headed in 2026, especially because an election year, traditionally not a lot of legislating gets done. We've already seen Republicans on Capitol Hill push back on this idea that there's going to be another reconciliation package. So I think it's fair to expect that Trump will turn to executive action again, especially again during an election year. If Trump is looking for some kind of political wins, some kind of action that he could take that might appeal to voters, he may turn to executive power to accomplish that. We certainly saw that with President Biden during his term. He tried to, for example, push through student loan forgiveness on an executive basis. That, of course, ran into trouble with the courts. But again, during an election year, at a time when Congress has sort of been sidelined, I think it's fair to expect that Trump, whether it's on immigration or the economy or other issues, healthcare, we may see Trump turn to executive action to try and get some of these things done.
All right, we will leave it at that. Always great to have your insight. Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Drew.